You know, we really shift the point of view in our film from the first one, and we really pull apart like the mythology of Candyman. We kind of look into like what makes a myth and who gets to decide what the myths are, who gets to decide who the villains are, and the martyrs and the monsters, and that was something that was really compelling to me as we, you know, constantly deal with Black people getting killed in horrifying ways in this country. So I think that's something that we really wanted to examine. I think the first movie is really preoccupied with, you know, Cabrini Green and gang violence and like graffiti and like things like that, or like very like present things. And then we wanted to kind of talk about the cyclical nature of what happened to Danny Robitaille as a person, and how that affects the community today.
Bernard Rose's 1992 film Candyman, based on a short story called The Forbidden by Clive Barker, is incredibly historically significant. It impacted an entire generation of Black film lovers and filmmakers, including myself, in a huge way. I appreciate it quite a bit. But it is very flawed, and its flaws are quite glaring. Aesthetically, it is very much a product of its time, often stumbling over some hard-to-excuse fake scares and certain effect sequences that have aged like milk. But these aesthetic issues are more than made up for by an absolutely iconic performance by Tony Todd, complemented by some great sound design, a captivating premise, and an incredible score by Philip Glass. The biggest problem for me is that the film is, let's say, thematically challenged. The problem of audience determinism, that is, the position relating to the reading of media which reduces individual readings to a direct consequence of identity and social class position, came to my mind repeatedly on my most recent viewing. I couldn't help but think about just how much my own identity factored into my experience with this film. Issues like a depiction of Black subjectivity reduced to the tired and subjugated binary of contentment and criminality, a strange reversion to the white savior narrative masked as a subversion of it, a depiction of Black poverty that plays directly into the collective white liberal imaginary, the hyper-theatrical performance of simple Black personhood that no doubt has its roots in minstrelsy, and the use of a public, hyper-violent, anti-Black lynching as nothing more than a means to achieve the end of a compelling vengeful movie monster really bothered me. These ideas being in the film didn't bother me. It's how they were handled. The half-baked and incomplete exploration of these ideas, essentially pushing them to the periphery of the film once they, quote, progress the story, is an unfortunate flaw that I'm almost certain wasn't intentional. I'm not accusing the film's thematic core of being malicious in intent, only inattentive. The idea that you could take Baker's short and replace its class themes with racial ones is absurdly naive, but not malicious. Something else worth pointing out is the issue of contempt. Writer Zadie Smith has recognized contempt as the most dangerous manifestation of racism, writing in her brilliant 2020 essay, Postscript: Contempt as a Virus. You start to think of contempt as a virus, infecting individuals first, but spreading rapidly through families, communities, peoples, power structures, nations. Less flashy than hate, more deadly. When contempt kills you, it doesn't have to be a vendetta or even entirely conscious. It can be a passing whim. It's far more common and therefore more lethal. The virus doesn't care about you. End quote. Helen holds her Black subjects in utter contempt, claiming to understand their need for urban myth as a means of processing and expressing the trauma associated with their oppressed sociological position in society. This is a position that she enters into her work with, thus flipping the research process and using the testimonies of her Black subjects to supplement her original thesis. Note that this is a theme that the 2021 film actually strengthens substantially in one scene. It's hard to tell if this reading of Helen has anything to do with the authorial intent, because she's still framed as the protagonist of the film, and the great irony is that the film itself functions in the same way as her paper would have. And something else I should mention is the film's handling of Cabrini Green. It acknowledges the fact that these buildings are virtually identical to the buildings in the Gold Coast just a few blocks away, using the mirror as a clever symbol of that fragile barrier between the two class positions. It should also be noted that this mirror is where Candyman is summoned, which is something that I think is sneakily smart. I just wish this film's depiction of its Black residents didn't keep this theme from truly working as intended. So yeah, although I appreciate it, I have very, very complicated thoughts on Bernard Rose's 1992 original. So when I heard Jordan Peele's name attached to the sequel, words could not express just how excited I was.
What we did with this version of it and this telling of it was we focused on the connection. We tried to bring out the connection with the fact that it's an epidemic of violence on black bodies in this country. And, you know, Candyman can't just be singular. He's a concept. He's a story. He's a boogeyman. And that means he applies across the boundaries of time.
When I heard that Nia DaCosta was attached to co-write and direct, I was a bit let down because I was unfamiliar with her work and I was hoping for another Jordan Peele solo directorial effort. But after seeing her film Little Woods, I started to get excited again, and then the trailer was released and Candyman became one of my most anticipated films of 2020. Due to the pandemic, it was delayed, which probably worked to its advantage because after the year that 2020 turned out to be, it couldn't have come at a better time than now. Nia DaCosta's Candyman is an aesthetically rich, dense, and focused interrogation of some incredibly complicated ideas and themes, including certain ideas that were abandoned on the periphery of the first film. It's virtually impossible to compartmentalize and separate the aesthetic makeup of this film from its themes because its themes are diegetic. That is to say, present in the way the film sounds, looks, feels, and functions. That is not to say, however, Candyman couldn't survive the test of aesthetic formalism. I mean, its directorial and cinematographic prowess is beautiful beyond belief, the score is haunting and memorable, the acting is incredible across the board, the screenplay is structurally and dialogically wonderful, and the editing is intentional and sharp. What I'm saying is that none of these aesthetic elements exist independently of the substance, making for a formidable experience that leaves you feeling a bit heavier by the end of it. So let's talk about some of those themes. I'll start with the Candyman myth and where it lives because this alone includes some very interesting ideas. In the 1992 original, Candyman was quite literally the writing on the walls and the whispers in the classroom, inhabiting two singular modes of expression in this film's universe for oppressed Black Cabrini Green residents, namely graffiti and the oral tradition. The Candyman story existed elsewhere, of course, as evidenced by Professor Philip Purcell's condescending spiel to Helen, but it's seen through a lens of the same contempt Helen is working with for her paper, framing what happened to Candyman, a black man with no real name in this story, as an isolated, heinous incident that became permanently attached to the legacy of Cabrini, thus reducing Candyman to an urban myth used by black residents who have no other way to express or process their collective trauma. But the true Candyman lives on the Cabrini rundown walls and on the tongues of the black residents who believe in and fear him wholeheartedly. They are aware of his continued existence as well as the ocean of violence from which he emerged. In Candyman 2021, the Candyman story is still occupying what's left of the Cabrini Green walls and the tongues of its residents, well, at least one of them. This film's main character, Anthony McCoy, a talented young artist, occupies what can be characterized as the black bourgeoisie, and when he and his girlfriend, Brianna Cartwright, a young black art gallery curator, hear about Cabrini Green and his violent history framed as a, quote, scary story preceded by a conversation about racial displacement and gentrification, no less, they hear nothing about Candyman. They instead hear Helen's story. Helen's story has been yoked with the legacy of Cabrini Green. This version of Helen's story omits Candyman completely, literalizing and grounding the sequence of events in a dark and tragic tale. It's the logical conclusion of the contemptuous approach that eliminates the harsh reality of Candyman's existence. And thematically, it also functions as a critique of the aforementioned reversion to the white savior narrative that the original film stumbled into. Anthony's curiosity eventually leads him to what's left of Cabrini, where he is told the story of Candyman. Note that he and his girlfriend have moved into a new and luxurious high-rise apartment that replaced the original impoverished Cabrini Green high-rises of old, illustrating the fragility of the black class divide. This sparks an obsession, allowing the Candyman story to be reborn and to inhabit the avant-garde art that Anthony produces, illustrating the fact that the anti-black violence that created Candyman is a reality that no amount of upward mobility can truly distance you from when you're black. Graffiti on a rundown and dirty project wall, or avant-garde expressionist painting on the polished walls of a prestigious gallery, the pain is exactly the same. It should also be noted that Candyman ultimately appeals to the oral tradition dialogically in the final moments of the film. On the subject of anti-black violence, this is a film that is painfully aware of the fact that anti-black violence is and was a form of popular entertainment. For reference, you can simply crack open a copy of Without Sanctuary. This awareness lends itself to the formation of one of the most interesting concepts the film has to offer, and that is the idea of Candyman not as a monstrous result of one isolated incident, but a horrific manifestation of the cyclicality of this ritualized anti-black violence. Candyman is a fixed entity with a face that changes with regularity, showing the link between the lynched victims of the 1800s and the victims of deadly police violence in present day. This version of Candyman allows writer-director Nia DaCosta to turn the iconic bees into a poetic symbolic link between the killings. The literal bees of 1890 became the police swarm. This film's awareness of anti-black violence as a form of popular entertainment is cleverly illustrated in the ways in which Anthony's artistic depiction of this violence is received in the art world. His artistic rendering of this violence is seen as, quote, too literal and obvious, leaving no room for audience interpretation. It's lower art to be looked down upon. What's interesting, though, is the disarticulation of what the art means to the person viewing it. I'm thinking specifically about Anthony's girlfriend, Brianna, and what it makes her feel, which in her words is pain. The white art critic dismisses Anthony's art outright, seemingly bored with his exhibit so long as it's only dealing with something like the Candyman mythos and straightforward black suffering. She displays the same contempt as Helen and Professor Purcell. Something else worth mentioning is her view of Anthony and other black artists, characterizing the act of expressing the trauma experienced in the hood as some sort of opportunistic and parasitic act of voyeurism and exploitation. She sees no true or genuine connection between Anthony and the pain he's expressing. Anthony's exhibit and these specific reactions to it serve as a meta-commentary on the film itself, preemptively dealing with the false accusations of a hollow piece of art with a surface of exploitative and manipulative black trauma that the artists don't want you to be able to see beyond. And it directly engages and dismantles the belief that black artists who occupy a different class position are somehow exempt from the suffering experienced by black victims of this horrific violence, and therefore shouldn't be able to aestheticize and depict this violence in a meaningful way that is truly close to them. It's the illusion of upward mobility within the confines of a paradigmatic condition. Another interesting thematic symbol is that of the razor in the candy. This symbol is introduced in the story of Sherman Fields, a hook-handed black man who was accused of handing out pieces of candy packaged with razor blades to children. He is killed by the police and later exonerated after his death. Note that the transgression was racialized, as the manhunt started when a little white girl received a razor blade packaged with her candy. The symbol is significant because it also references the film and what it's doing. The plasticity of the horror genre has been fantastic for filmmakers with really complicated and controversial ideas to explore for decades. So many towering entries in the genre are able to be about something while managing to thrill and terrify. The challenge for Candyman 2021, though, is the fact that the substance was never meant to be hidden or buried under layers of genre filigree or code. Again, the themes are diegetic, which is where the metaphor comes in. If the thrills of the genre are the candy that people come in expecting, then the harsh reality it comes packaged with is the blade. In conclusion, Candyman 2021 is a film that contends with the routinized spectacle of the pained black body, but it is not a film that finds comfort in it. Anthony McCoy's story touched me in ways that I was not expecting. The real-life victims of similar fates were hauntologically present in every moment of his journey, causing the type of reflection, consideration, remembrance, and cathartic resolution they all deserve. This is a film that I've been utterly obsessed with since the day I saw it, and I love it for everything that it is, and perhaps more importantly, everything that it manages not to be. It shows the importance of the black authorial voice in stories that deal with the black experience. I have a feeling this is going to stick around and be remembered and referenced for years to come, and given its thematic brilliance, it'll function a little like Candyman himself. Quote, "It's a blessed condition, believe me, to live in people's dreams, to be whispered at street corners, but not have to be. You understand?" Thanks for watching. I'm Lee, and I'm a fake critic.